Welcome to the Millennials and Community Podcast. When somebody says success, what does that mean to you? We all have a different definition, and it can change as we age. So join Matt and Carlo as they dive into what they define as success and how a small shift in your perspective can lead to a more healthy approach. Thank you for being part of our community. Hi, everybody.
What's up?
Welcome to another episode of the Millennials and Community Podcast. I am Carlo. That's Matt. We're really excited to have you guys here with us. It's such a success to have you on this episode. Hey, Matt.
I see what you did there.
I'm glad. I'm glad somebody did.
Yeah, no one else will until a couple minutes from now when we tell you what the episode's going to be about.
Or they read the episode description. We're bad at breaking the fourth wall. Anyways.
Isn't the whole podcast a fourth wall?
Yes.
Because we're talking two people.
I guess.
I don't know how walls work.
I wouldn't be a good Deadpool. I'm just not good at it.
No, not ideal.
Anyways, icebreaker. Hey, Matt, describe a time where you felt on top of the world because you succeeded.
Yeah, I this one is tricky for me. I think that this is really appropriate given a lot of the conversations we had in the last episode. I think a time where I felt on top of the world, earlier this year, I had the opportunity to go and present at a physical education conference in Guadalajara, Mexico. And it was the first time that I had taught dance play with a translator. So I was speaking largely in English with a little bit of Spanglish kind of put in for effect. And I had a translator that was there, obviously kind of supporting me to help that all of the teachers that came to my workshops felt successful. And the part that made me feel absolutely on top of the world, it was very cool to get the chance to present to educators in a different country. But typically what happens at conferences is throughout the conference, you see a little bit of a dwindling, right? People are having really intense learning experiences, and so their participation kind of dwindles throughout the weekend. Sure. Well, I had the opportunity to teach 4 workshops over the course of the weekend, and throughout the 4 of them, each of them got progressively more attendees in each session, which is absolutely unheard of. And the 4th one, I had people coming up to me and saying to me in the best English that they could that they were told by colleagues of theirs that they just had to ditch whatever session they were going to attend and come to mine instead.
Cool.
And so it just I just had this feeling of just being on top of the world, of course, because I was in a place where, I don't speak Spanish well enough to do the session in entirely in Spanish. And it was just an opportunity where I felt I was able to make an impact in spite of a language barrier.
That's super cool. Now, do you think the translator was translating everything exactly as you said it, or were they like maybe making your presentation a little bit more enthrallic?
Well, the interesting thing is I had 4 different translators. So each workshop, they paired me with a different person to help with the translation. Some of them were a little bit more into it than others. All of them wonderful, wonderful people, but some of them were a little bit more into it than others. Interestingly, though, I had a phys ed, a doctor, like someone who has a PhD in phys ed. Nope. And someone who had their doctorate in phys ed go to my translator at the end of the session just to clarify some of the technical translations from English to Spanish, which I thought was really, really cool for this doctor in phys ed to talk to one of the local phys ed teachers who was translating for me to say, hey, here's actually how a more direct translation or a more proper translation of these words to Spanish.
That's really cool. For me, it would have to be the very large change to my physical health that I made a few years back. I went from like 315 pounds to at my lowest, I was 230. And that took a little bit longer, but like my initial weight loss, I lost about 85 pounds in a year. And the way that we celebrated that was going out to lunch and eating pizza, which was just wonderful because I hadn't had pizza in a year. literally. But it wasn't just the weight loss that was a success to me. It was a complete 180 in like my entire lifestyle, right? Like from being very sedentary to working out 4 to 5 days a week, and completely changing the way I ate and the way that I took care of my body, and started focusing on stretching and physical activity. And the reward for that was just this feeling of capability. It's so hard to describe for somebody who hasn't experienced it, but like when you're as big as I was, everything is difficult. Right. And like I was still a very strong, very capable human being. I was young, right? So it wasn't like I was walking around on a stroller or needed assistance or anything like that, but it was just more difficult to live.
Yeah.
So to kind of make this drastic transition and to notice the way that people treated you differently and the way I treated myself differently, and how my brain chemistry changed to just be so much more conducive for my own well-being, was just an amazing transformation. I don't ever want to have to do it again. Ever again. I'm very happy being a healthy person. I want to stay that way. That's a lifelong goal and commitment of mine. But I don't think I will ever live down just that feeling. And it was actually kind of cool because right around that 1 year mark, I wrote a post on Reddit, on the keto subreddit, because that's primarily what I followed to lose a lot of this weight. And I, kind of shared my story, and it got so much positivity out of that post that I actually turned around and I ended up printing off the post along with some of my favorite comments, and it's framed and printed on my wall. And it's just something that I'm so immensely proud of. So yeah, that was quite the success for me.
Very, very cool. Very, very cool. Well, the reason, as you would have noted in the description for this episode, and the reason why we're talking about times we felt on top of the world, is we want to talk today about success. And just a little bit of the background, Carlo and I, as quite high achieving individuals, or in want of being high achieving, I suppose. That's the word. Yeah, let's use ambitious. We talk a lot about what success looks like, because if we know what it looks like, maybe it's easier to chase, right? And so we talk about that a lot with the focus of this podcast, quite frankly. And I think we both came into it with ideas of what we were hoping to get out of it, what we were hoping to provide to others by way of doing it. And we also had, quite frankly, some ideas in our head of what it's going to look on the other side, and what it would look like to have a successful podcast. And those markers have kind of changed for us as we've gone along and continued this journey. But it led to a broader conversation that we thought merited an episode on how we determine success. Now, it's interesting. Both of our stories, we really, really showcase that moment that we define as the moment we succeeded.
The finish line.
Right, exactly. But I think that so many people are way too focused on the finish line. And so that's really a lot of what we want to talk about today. It's so often we want to distill something down into a win or a loss, a yes or a no, a success or a failure. And I think that there's so many more things that we want to dive into that really, really capture success in a different light, especially given that if we're looking at a finish line being the sole metric of success, the trouble is there's so many things externally that are going to happen in our environment around us that could play a role in dictating our ability to cross said finish line. In other words, it's not all going to be within our control. And so measuring based on that final outcome can sometimes lead us to this place of not really having a true sense or a true representation of all of the work that we put towards a certain thing, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
So I guess, just to jump in before we hit the ground running here, how is it that you typically think about success? What does success usually look like for you?
Well, I think it depends on the size of the goal, because there are always going to be some smaller things that you can accomplish relatively quickly. There aren't many goalposts along the way. You kind of just have, hey, this is the final thing that I need to do. And once it's there, you're done. And, those are great, but they don't quite give you the same feeling of achievement that a very large goal does. But a large goal is something that takes a lot of commitment, a lot of time, and it has a lot of points along the way that are going to be a good metric to kind of measuring yourself. And to me, when I think about success, it just means that of all of those metrics that I'm kind of hitting as I go by, I am succeeding at more of them than I am failing at. Okay, because you can fail along the way to a grander goal. And one of the best kind of ways I could put it to you is weightlifting, right? You can go to the gym every single day for months on end, and your goal over time is to increase the weight that you can lift. It's how you do progressive overload. It's how you can eventually, gain more muscle if that's your goal. But there are going to be those times that you don't have the energy, the lift didn't go right, you go to pick something up and that you could have lifted last week, and it just feels so much heavier today. But over time, you eventually keep hitting these personal records and things, the weight goes up and the weight goes up, and you might fail this week, but you'll succeed the next, right? And I think that, again, as long as you can say, hey, week over week, I am making progress, I am moving forward, even though I have those failures, that is what a successful person does, right?
Okay, cool. What I'm thinking might be interesting later on this episode, and this is how our show notes are a living document, my friends. So we're constantly evolving things as we go along. I would love for one of us to have a goal that we kind of workshop, because I think the weightlifting one is really interesting, and I want to tease some things out, I think, and try to see where we can get to. So the way that I think about success and about goals, I shouldn't say the way that I do this all the time. The way that I really am trying to think differently about it is about really striving towards the metrics of success being the inputs rather than the outputs. Now, you might remember hearing me say something similar to this in a previous episode from about a month ago, but what I mean by that is we are always in control of the things that we put into a process, and we're not always in control of the things that result from it. And so sometimes, and we'll get into how we set goals later on, sometimes when we're setting goals, we have a tendency to set goals where the outcome of the goal is not within our control. And so I think it's really important that we shift and switch that frame of reference. And we'll talk about goal setting in a little while. But so some of the frame of reference that I want to share with you, just to kind of illustrate the way that I think about this. We often talk about whether it's about progress or perfection is something that is commonly talked about. I think that's a really important frame of reference to think about getting better every day, that progress mindset, rather than chasing perfection. When we chase perfection, it feels as though it's this... It feels daunting. It feels like it's harder to achieve, and it's also more nebulous, right? How will we know if we actually did it? Well, the reality is that it's very rare in any pursuit that we may have to actually achieve perfection. And perfection is really just an opportunity where we can say we've done the best one that we've ever done yet. That's really all we can ever claim perfect to be. By any sort of objective scale, And so there's always the opportunity to improve, always the opportunity to do better. And so the way that I am really, really trying to more and more think about how I define success is the degree to which I continue to improve and the degree to which I continue to elevate and evolve. The other way that I think about this, for those of you well, this word will be familiar to everybody, but the idea of literacy, right? All kids, when they're going through school, they learn different types of literacy. There's literacy, numeracy. For my phys ed geeks out there, there is physical literacy. And in all types of literacy, there is the idea that you never wake up one day and be like, well, I've done it. I am perfectly literate.
Yeah.
Right? There's never a time where you know every word. You don't know the whole dictionary front to back. Maybe some people do, but it's not something where you're ever perfect at. It's a lifelong journey. And the ambition or the success should be to continue striving towards continuing to develop stronger skills in literacy. And so those are just a couple of the ways, I guess, that I think about ways to frame what success could look like.
Sure. And I think that they're all very viable, very good ways to look at it. And probably a healthier approach to it than, this binary win and loss that so many times that we do. Because, if we again use this idea of weight loss as our goal is our form of success, it is not a linear path. There is very few goals out there that will provide you with a linear path to success. So you have to be very much willing to take the L, even though it's not really a loss, right? It's just on the path. And I really resonate with your idea of what we put in is our value of success rather than kind of the final result, because those are the things that you can control. And as long as you're putting in the necessary work, no, it doesn't really matter how long it takes for you to get where you're trying to go. It doesn't really matter where the final result ends up landing. You knew that you did what you were supposed to do. Nobody can ever take that away from you, and nobody can ever fault you for it. It was actually a really cool experience for me when we were in Costa Rica. That was like my first big trip after losing all the weight. And I remember being, shirtless for the first time in a group of people that I didn't know, and feeling somewhat self-conscious, and then kind of having this moment of realization of like, nobody knows what I had to do to get here, to be able to stand here with no shirt on, feeling as comfortable as I do. So it doesn't really matter what anybody else's opinion is of me. I did what I did, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
And that was a really cool moment. But if I just tried to stare at that metric of like, are people looking at me and going, oh my God, he's an Adonis? Well, the answer was no. Then I failed. And I didn't. I succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. And I think that's really important.
So let's then kind of take a step into this. And I'm curious, and I'm putting you on the spot, so I'm mindful of that. But are there any goals that you currently have that you'd be open to sharing, no matter how big or small, and we can kind of workshop the concept that I'm tossing out here as far as what it looks like to shift the frame of reference that we have towards success?
Sure. So one of the things that I want to start doing is several episodes back we did like a financial literacy episode. And we got some really great response out of that. And I had a lot of people say that they really enjoyed it. And considering that it is an area of expertise for me, I feel like I have a fair amount to offer there. So I want to start creating more videos online that can provide some knowledge and some education in finance so that people can hopefully learn a bit from me and help themselves move forward. So we could workshop the goal of getting that kind of started and maybe growing a little bit of a following, which of course is a final outcome that cannot be controlled. I can't control somebody hitting the follow button, hit the follow button.
Okay, great. Like, let's use this. I love this. Okay, so tell me about what it is that you want to achieve. Like, I understand that the goal is to create this thing that has a followership and you're able to host events that are attended well attended. So I get that. But like, what's the purpose of it?
So the purpose is to create a kind of a resource for people to go to gain knowledge, in the hopes that, if there is somebody that needs additional knowledge beyond what I can offer online, that they would reach out to me and allow me to help them personally.
And what will feel like success to you in doing this? Like, what is going to be the point where you can hold your head high and say, I did this? Like, what would that look like?
I think two things. One would be that there are a decent amount of people that care about my content. So, if we think about that in a measurable term, it might be, let's say for now, 500 subscribers to my YouTube channel.
You mentioned there was two things.
Yeah. The other one would be being given at least one opportunity to work with someone personally.
Okay. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this. Why is having a certain quantity of people consuming your content meaningful to you?
Because that is a metric by which you measure social media success. Because subscribers are ultimately what opens the door for you, right? So if we think about this idea that, hey, I'm going to be providing this all at no cost, well, there has to be some sort of monetary return to, cover costs and all that kind of stuff. And that doesn't happen until you hit a certain subscriber count or videos watched, etc. So that to me is important because it opens the door to allow me to do something like that long term.
Okay.
Right? Because it takes time, it takes money to do those kinds of things. And as much as I want to do things out of just my willingness to help, there's costs that are going to have to be covered. So we need to make a little bit of money at some point off of it.
Okay, great. So we've already shifted perspective on what the goalpost for success is here, because at first it was, I want to get this many followers. That, as you already commented, very, very external, right? Like there's a lot of work that we can do to contribute, but the exact number of people that actually click that subscribe or follow button is going to not be in the sole control of you. But when we switch that frame of reference, the followers is a means to an end, the end being that we need to achieve some sort of revenue to be able to make this viable. And your goal doesn't have to be net zero. It can be to make a profit. There's nothing wrong with that,
sure.
Right? And I think that this is the first shift that I think is really, really meaningful, because it allows for a shift from a number of people taking an action to something that might not actually be related to the followers. I understand that social media wise, that is a primary method of monetization, but maybe you wind up with a sponsor. Maybe you wind up with partners who are willing to co-brand or co-sign on these things with you, this content with you, right? And so it opens you up to other ways of achieving the same thing that might be more within your control. So what is an action that you can take that is repeatable in the service of trying to monetize your content?
It would be creating good quality content on a regular basis. So I have some content already out there, but I am not doing new stuff regularly. And that is part of the battle of growing on social media, is you have to stay relevant and you have to stay current. So making it part of my, regular workflow to be putting things out on a more regular basis.
Okay, so there's actually two things in there that you said. You talked about good quality content and you talked about regular content. Mm-hmm. So those are two different things, really, really important to be able to highlight both of them. So you want to be able to do this regularly and you want to be able to do it good. Both of those things are repeatable. We can look at slow incremental improvements to the quality of the content as well as keeping up with the schedule. Both of those things very, very much in your control. So then within that, what sorts of a regular time schedule, like how often are you wanting to create and or post? So we'll start there. How often do you want to be putting out content?
I think at a minimum, I'd like to have
a new video, like a short video, like something like no longer than like 5 minutes, at least once a week for a little bit.
Okay, so you're wanting to put out content weekly?
I think so.
Great. That is something that is 100% within your control, that is measurable, that is an input. So that is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So then on the other side, how frequently do you want to actually demonstrate an increased quality of your content?
That's a tougher question for me to answer, because like with this podcast, it has been a road of like constantly trying to improve my editing skills and the quality of what we're talking about and all that kind of stuff. So there was never like a timeline set for that. It was always just try to get better every time. So I guess my hope would be that at least every few videos, so if we had to put a number on, let's say every month, you could notice that it was a little bit better in some fashion, whether it was my delivery, whether it was the way it was edited, whether whatever. But at least, every 4 to 5 videos, you could be like, you can tell he's getting better.
Cool. Okay. So we now have a really, really quick and dirty goal structure set up for you, right? We're releasing content weekly, and every month we want to see some sort of a noticeable incremental improvement in the quality of the content that's being produced. So this is really cool. So all of a sudden in the last 5 minutes, we've gone from, I want to have 500 subscribers. Obviously that's harder. You break it down and you say, okay, I want 500 subscribers in the next year. That's 10 new followers a week. That's right. Yeah. And that's hard because we can't necessarily control what people do. We can control what we do. And so by setting goals in the service of things that are in our control, we're better able. So you see what I did there? I questioned the purpose of the goal. We dig deeper on that a little bit. It's similar to what we've done in a previous exercise with using the why exercise, the 9 whys, to really dive deep. Similar premise. We're really trying to understand what the actual foundational goal we have, and then we're setting metrics of success that are solely within our control. It doesn't mean that we're not still excited and looking for those 500 subscribers, but what it means is we have other things to celebrate so that you are not in a position where you're losing momentum, you're losing steam if you're not feeling like it's successful along the way. So we're digging deep. We're using 9 whys to get to the bedrock of what the goal is. We are setting goals that are repeatable and time sensitive. These things are both really, really crucial because we want goals that we can repeat and develop habits around. And again, this is the way that we can develop that habit, really, is what we're talking about, and just create something that we are succeeding at and then celebrating, because that means that once a month you can celebrate and be like, amazing, that's 4 more pieces of content and 1 more improvement. And then all of a sudden by the end of the year, you've got 48 pieces of content and 12 micro improvements, and that's pretty impactful.
Yeah, I would agree. That's super cool. I really enjoyed that. In fact, if you guys couldn't hear it or tell, I was taking notes that entire time because I'm going to go back and use that. Matt did all the work for me.
So this is really, I think, kind of a cool way to start, and I hope that that's a tool that all of you listening can feel is helpful for you in trying to rethink and reframe your goals. Again, I think too often we have this block because we set goals that are contingent on things outside of our control, and then we get discouraged when they don't happen, and then we don't know what to do next, and we kind of flounder a little bit, and we find ourselves stuck in the mud. So what I certainly kind of like hogged that process, but especially from your fitness journey, what are some ways that you found success in pursuing your goals and setting goals first and then pursuing them?
Sure. So that was very much a passion project. So there wasn't like this moment where I had made a decision about what, like, this is my goal weight. I didn't have one. I do now, but I didn't have one then. And it was more just, I'm going to live to be the best version of myself. And I've actually talked about this in some personal content that you can find on my YouTube channel now. But it's this idea of like, I have an internal vision of who I am and how I view myself. And the goal was to try and have that person in the mirror match the internal vision. So again, no real goal weight, but one of the things that I still do to this day when I'm trying to lose some weight is I will weigh myself every morning. Now, a lot of fitness professionals will tell you not to do that because it can be discouraging, because it is not a linear thing. But I would weigh myself every morning and I would write my weight down on my mirror with a dry erase marker. And I had both a red and a green marker. And if I was down from the day previous, so not down in total, not down from a week before, but down from the day previous, it would be green. If it was up from the day previous, it would be red. And my goal was just that looking back across the week, there was more green than there was red. And I found that immensely powerful. I thought it was just the coolest thing because after a year of doing that, my mirror was covered. It was unusable. And I took a photo of it and erased it and started again, right? So that was one of my tools. It's just kind of this daily measurement of just trying to be a little bit better today than I was yesterday.
And was there any kind of partner practice that went along with that in terms of thinking about on green days, what things that you did that helped it be a green day, or reflection on things that you did that might have contributed to being a red day?
Maybe. Obviously, if there was several red days in a row, it led me to kind of look back upon those days and go, okay, what was it here that was, out of what I would do on a green day? But because I was making such a massive shift, there weren't a whole bunch of red days that were something of my own fault, right? And I say that giving myself full grace because, the weight loss process is not something you have to fault yourself for in any way. Like food is food. You need it to survive. Don't beat yourself up over it. But it wasn't very common that it was because I, made a choice to binge eat that day. It was because, hey, we had a family thing and mom made pasta. And in my journey of weight loss, not eating a lot of carbohydrates, if you ate some pasta, you automatically put on some weight, just not from weight gain, but from water. And that's what happens when you don't eat carbs for a while and then you eat it. So yes, I would be very aware of that, but it wasn't, it wasn't this moment of like, oh, I have to go back and look at this and okay, don't ever eat mom's pasta again because that gave you a red day. It was just like, okay, that was it.
Very, very cool. So what I'm curious, and full disclosure, I don't know where, take this wherever you will. I have no kind of like, come down this road. How do you feel that the idea of redefining the way we think of success or redefining our goal setting impacts millennials as a generation?
I think that the overall goals as a generation that we have are so drastically different from the generation before us that we've been forced to redefine them, right? So if you look at like the traditional goals that somebody might say they have in their mid to late 20s, it would be own a home, start a family, get married, have kids. But that's been out of reach for a very large amount of millennials, right? So a lot of that has had to kind of go out the door. Not that we are giving up on those goals, but we're having to shift our thought process on them. So do we still want to own a home? Absolutely. But you see a lot of millennials going, well, I don't own this home, but I am going to make it my home. And you see some people doing amazing decor and arts and crafts and DIY projects. And we see a lot of like homesteading style stuff where people are raising chickens and growing farms, their own vegetables. And, that's something that by and by the vast majority of other generations don't get into until they're in their more senior years. So we've kind of seen some stuff like that. There's, the idea of like having children and making a shift in, well, maybe we don't have kids because of whatever reason, but we can still live a great life. And a lot of millennials have gotten dogs and cats and, fur babies, quote unquote. Right. So I think as millennials, we're very fluid in what our definition of success is, purely because what we are chasing is happiness and fulfillment, not material gain, not arbitrary timelines that are set out for us. And it doesn't mean you don't grieve the loss of that goal in some way. Like there are many people that are very upset that they don't own a home and feel it's out of reach. But yeah, we're a lot more fluid, and I think a lot more forgiving with ourselves, knowing that some of these things are just outside of our control. And I think that is one of the great resiliencies of our generation.
I really like that assessment. I think that's really great.
Yeah. Okay, so like I've been doing a lot of talking here, and like thank you for that. I've really enjoyed it. That's my opinion of, as millennials, why it's kind of a big thing for us. Do you have a differing opinion?
I don't. I agree very much with what you've laid out in terms of the typical goalposts, I suppose, for life markers certainly has shifted. Shifted for a whole lot of reasons. There's kind of a general questioning of whether the goals of generations past are still applicable, yeah, and applicable or attainable. And I think both of those conversations kind of float back and forth between the two. And so it is interesting to see the millennial generation, sometimes not by choice, really, really lock in and question whether or not these things are applicable to them. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of neat to see that shifting. And when I talk about kind of really challenging the purpose of goals that we have using that 9 whys exercise, it doesn't mean that you can't want to have a family at this age, but there needs to be a more thoughtful, robust answer than because it's the thing you do.
Yeah.
And I truly, truly believe that. And it's really cool to see that, like, by and large, as a generation, we're actually having those conversations. Mm-hmm. And it's not just like, well, time for my picket fence now. I'm 26 and a half years old, right? So it's cool to see that that's kind of where we're getting to as a generation. Mm-hmm. What I'm actually kind of more interested in is like how this pertains on a community level. I think that what I share might be a little bit of a tricky sell to some people who have a really conventional sense around success, and I want to be a millionaire by age 35, or I want to own my home, my cars, and whatever kind of thing. And there's some really, I think that some people are going to listen to this and think, well, it's kind of a weird premise. But I think that from a community standpoint, this becomes a lot more robust, maybe. And just because when we think about the type of goals that I'm looking to set, and I believe are really, really relevant in our personal way, a lot of my thinking from this has been shaped by some of Simon Sinek's work on finite and infinite games, and he would be the first one to tell you that some of his work on finite and infinite play actually goes back to some other play research. And as all of you know, I'm very, very passionate about play as a construct. But for those of you who aren't familiar, the idea of finite and infinite games is this idea that in a finite game, there is a set amount of time, there are set players, and there are defined rules. So think of a football game, right? 4 quarters, 15 minutes each. In Canadian football, you've got 12 players a side. The field is 110 yards long, and you have a ball that's agreed upon as like, this is the way we do it. Well, life just isn't like that, right? Like, life doesn't have 4 quarters. Life doesn't have a finite set of rules that we've all universally agreed to live by. And so at a community level, I think it's way more important to treat it as an infinite game. And in an infinite game, the sole goal is to sustain the game, right? To continue the game going on, whether that be, life, relationships, community, friendships, like these things. The sole goal is for that community to sustain itself. And if our goal is not to win the game, but rather to keep playing, I'm talking at kind of a communal level now, the way that we make goals has to shift, because no longer am I trying to be you, but I'm trying to say we're in this together now, right? And it's a really, really important shift, because we start looking at, if I'm not trying to beat you, then I don't need to think of scarcity as the prime construct or the prime rule that is governing how we're interacting with each other. This means that I'm not by default in competition with you anymore, and instead it opens up the perspective and the mindset for us to be more collaborative, right? This is what I tried to do when we were talking about followers as a means of monetization. If we chase followers as the goal, then we're just looking at followers and hoping that monetization follows that. But if monetization is the goal, it opens up to a different realm of ways we could possibly monetize your work. So I think at a community level, this infinite thinking is a really, really important way to frame the type of goals that we can set, because it allows us to think about it from the standpoint of looking to perpetuate the game as being the key goal, and all other success metrics when it comes to a community being in the service of sustaining that community.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really cool way of kind of thinking about it, because to kind of lend some credence to that, when you again think about this idea of what I said about the weight loss, was that I made a lifestyle shift. I 180'd it. Now, if I had thought of this as a very finite game, once I hit my quote-unquote goal, I would have stopped and would have likely returned back to my old lifestyle, which means I would have just put the weight back on, which happens to many people when they go through weight loss journeys. No matter how big or how small, they end up gaining the weight back. I've done it myself personally 3 times. But when you treat it such as I have now as this infinite game, the way you're putting it, where the goal is to continue living a strong and capable and healthy life, and that is what I'm basing the goal off of, it makes so much more sense to like do it long term, because there is no finish line. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that really it's just a way of reframing. Like, in a very, very Western colonial mindset, we think that everything that we achieve has to be at the expense of somebody else. And that's just doesn't need to be true. Sure, if you set that as kind of like the context by which like you think about success, then sure, you're going to look for opportunities for conflict. You're going to look for opportunities to beat somebody else. But if you just shift that thinking and be like, what needs to happen for us all to keep playing this game? It totally changes the way that we look at things. And if you're interested in learning more, because I'm certainly in the time of our episodes not doing it full justice, the 2 books that I really recommend, I talked about Simon Sinek's work on this, and so his book is called The Infinite Game. And it's a really, really cool way of using this theory around finite and infinite games and how to reframe the way we think about business, the way we think about personal development. We don't try to win at relationships, right? Again, you're trying to sustain and continue them. But if you want to kind of dig deeper, the original work that the Infinite Game, Simon Sinek's book, is based on is actually a book by someone called Dr. James Carson. It's called Finite and Infinite Games. So very, very similar title, obviously. But it kind of dives deeper from a more philosophical standpoint about the value of what happens when we shift that perspective and think about things from an infinite mindset. And it really gives us the space to really appreciate what can happen if we're thinking about a lot of our goals and a lot of our goalposts and success metrics in a way that is in the interest of not winning, but rather continuing the game.
Okay. So, like, I'm definitely going to check that book out. In fact, I'm kind of looking at it right now.
I have them both. Don't buy it.
Okay, great. Well, I wasn't.
Okay.
Yar. So we've talked about, we went through this really cool exercise, where we walked through a goal together. Hopefully that's a good framework for people to kind of go back on. We've talked about maybe shifting our understanding of what this goal means. But what are some other things that you could potentially say that will allow us to actually make some actionable movement, to make these actions count and bring us closer to being the kind of person that regularly accomplishes a goal they set out to do?
Yeah, I mean, look, like every single one of us is going to get a kick of good feelings in our head when we cross something off of our to-do list, right? So these goals that we set for ourselves, they can be very transactional, very small, and they can go up to being very, very big. And regardless of whether you have small goals or big ones, it's just about shifting the mindset towards being more open to goals that are within our control. So I guess the first thing that I would say in terms of actionable things, take a pad of paper and write down all of the goals that you have today before you go ahead and dissect them, and just by itself put whatever sort of symbol, but pick one symbol, call it a star, beside goals that you can 100% control, like that are 100% up to you. Nobody else has any sort of bearing. Nothing else has any sort of bearing, right? For example, I want to run X number of kilometers this year. Well, that's something that's maybe not a great example because you have pretty good control of that. But we just need to be mindful that we're keeping track of, here would be the distinction. I want to run this many kilometers outdoors. Well, weather,
Yeah.
right? So, okay, I want to run this many times a week. Well, that's more sustainable because that means they were not necessarily doing it outside, but we're potentially doing it inside. So starting with our list of goals, highlighting and showing the ones that we feel are 100% in our control, maybe circling or put an exclamation mark or question mark beside ones that aren't 100% within our control. And then start there and look at reframing it so that it is in our control. That would be the first step. And then again, challenge like why those are goals of ours. What are they in service of? And I think that's a question that is really apt for a lot of the goals, because sometimes we have goals and we want to be able to say that we've done them. That's okay, but let's be real honest with ourselves about why we have that goal. And make sure that you're happy and you're content with the reason why that goal exists for you. So I think those are the first two actions that I would say. And then the third one would just be to make sure that as you're breaking these things down along the way, that you're celebrating those many moments. Yeah. So making sure that you're taking the chance to, have a small sip of your favorite whiskey every month if you've put out your 4 pieces of content and you got your one improvement, right? Maybe you buy yourself a nice bottle at the end of the year if you've continued that for 52 weeks, right? And it's just the opportunity to celebrate the work that we put into something and not solely celebrating when we cross that finish line, but like every inch that we run between here and the finish line.
Yeah, I can't. The celebrating the mini wins for me is such a massive driving factor when it comes to these kind of goals. And they can be really difficult, especially if you're in a little bit of a lull where maybe you feel like you haven't had a success in a while. to provide yourself with that celebration, but it is so crucial to celebrate the little wins. It's just, without it, it's like there's no point. And again, this lends itself to this idea of infinite game, is that if you're constantly celebrating the smallest little wins, you are winning the game.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's really cool. Okay, so it's not like we've never talked about goals before, but I think that this episode has lent itself to be a little bit more unique in the fact that we've provided somewhat of an action step for people to take. So is there any other thing that you might want to make people aware of that could help them along this process?
I think what I would say is not everything needs to have a purpose. Not everything needs to have a goal. I know that I was very, very much saying that when you do have a goal, make sure you understand the purpose of that goal.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that everything you're doing in every moment, every waking moment needs to be in service of a goal. It doesn't, right? We can still have our escapism activities. We can still have those opportunities to just be silly and be fun for the sake of it. And it's really important that, particularly for people that find themselves to be really high achieving, that you strike a balance between looking to achieve and just looking to thrive, which are not always the same thing.
I think that's really important. And then I'm going to kind of flip on the other side of that. There might be somebody listening to this that doesn't really have much for goals right now. And that's not of anybody's fault. Like, that can kind of just happen out of getting busy with life and having to prioritize some other things. But if you are in this position, what I've noticed for myself is that if I don't have a goal on the go, I tend to feel very complacent and somewhat lethargic about life. It's almost like I've lost a little bit of purpose. And again, talking about this idea of millennials, is that we thrive off of purpose. It's what really gives us our fulfillment in life. So if you don't have a goal, my encouragement really would be for you to set one. Pick something, just something that you've kind of been putting off or thinking about doing, and just pick it and go. Follow this framework, and it doesn't really matter whether you quote unquote succeed at it or not. We know that you will, but it'll give you something to chase after. And I can guarantee you, the first time you accomplish something that you're truly proud of, it really shifts your understanding of what life is meant to be. There's so much power in being goal-driven and then succeeding at those goals. I don't think really there's much out there that can bring as much joy as being that kind of person that feels success in all those little things because you understand how to play the infinite game.
I think that's a wonderful way to wrap it.
Perfect.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to you. I'm really, really grateful that we've had the opportunity to continue to have such nuanced conversations, and something as personal as success is a kind of an interesting and weird and wonderful thing to unpack. And so thanks for being willing to go down this journey with me and try to process different ways of thinking about how we perceive and how we measure success.
Yeah, of course. And my gratitude is not a new one. I've said it many times before, but I absolutely just am in awe of the fact that you always seem to have an exercise for everything. And it just stems back to this commitment that you have about learning in terms of leadership and soft skills. And so to break it down, and the value that I found in that little 5-minute exercise is going to stick with me, and something that I can go back and re-listen to and revisit over and over. So I really appreciate you not only walking me through that, but the commitment that you've made to learning how to tell people those things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, this has been another episode, as always, of the Millennials and Community Podcast. We hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, please reach out and let us know via your favorite social media platform. Make sure that if you aren't already, make sure that you're subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, maybe on YouTube. And yeah, like I said, hit us up on all our socials, either the Millennials and Community socials or our personal socials.
Yep, what he said. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day. See ya.